All right, today's topic is going to be equivalent fractions. Now, just want to bring your attention to this really fancy math term we have up here, and it's equivalent. You may look at the first section of this, and if you say that to yourself, it says equal. Well, equivalent fractions are nothing more than two fractions that are exactly the same. They might look different, but they're equal to the same amount. So let's get right into it here. We have a few fraction bars right here, a few shapes. We're going to split these evenly. All right, so I know I'm going to just take this and make one of those fractions that we're probably pretty familiar with. This is 2 pieces. So my denominator at the bottom is going to be 2 because it's split into 2. And this piece over here would be 1. And this piece would be over here would be 1. And I split this in half. So it's equal to, if I just talk about one of these sections, it's equal to 1/2. I'm going to take this bottom fraction, or bottom fraction bar, and I'm going to split this into half, but then I'm going to split that half into half. Okay, let's take a look at what do we have now. Now ask yourself, how many pieces is it split into? And you probably guessed it, it's split into 4. So my denominator in each section is going to be 4. I'm going to draw a fraction bar over the top. And each one of these, this is 1 piece, this is 1 piece, 1 piece, and 1 piece. Now I want to circle the same amount I did up there because I want to make an equivalent or an equal fraction. So now I bet you probably can guess, how many fourths do I have? Well, I have 2 fourths now. And just so you know, 1/2 is equal to, you guessed it, 2 fourths. Those are equivalent fractions. Now, every time we want to find an equivalent fraction, we do not have to necessarily draw a picture like I've drawn here. There is a little bit easier way of doing it, maybe a little more mathematical, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into our rule here. Now, the rule for making equivalent fractions is anytime you multiply or divide the numerator, or top number in a fraction, and denominator, or bottom number in a fraction, by the same number, the result is an equivalent fraction. So let's go ahead and do an example here. I have 1/2 written there, so let's go ahead and write 1/2 again. And I want to make an equivalent fraction to 1/2. That means I want to make another fraction that is the same amount, just looks a little bit different, but it's still equal. So the rule says if I multiply or divide, well, 1 is our numerator, so let's go ahead and multiply any number I could think of. I'm just going to stick with 2. Now, it says I have to do the same number times the numerator and denominator. So it's the same number has to be down here at the bottom as well. So if I multiply 1 times 2, the result would be 2. And then if I go 2 times 2, that would be 4. So 2 fourths is equal to 1/2. Notice that. And that proves now, using some math, that our previous picture was true. Okay, let's try another example just to see how you're doing with this. Let's do 1/5. And remember, our equivalent fraction rule tells us that if we multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number, we're going to get an equivalent fraction. So I have 1 times 2, it's going to be 2. And then 5 times 2 gives us 10. So that tells us 2 tenths is equal to 1/5. Those are exact same fraction. Again, they look different, but technically they're exactly the same amount. Let's go over one like 1/4. And instead of times 2, let's do 3. Now remember, I have to do the numerator and denominator by the same number. So 1 times 3, 4 times 3, 3/12 is equal to 1/4. Those are the exact same fraction. Let's try one more over here. Let's try 3/5. And we'll multiply times 2. We'll double these. I'm just trying to find equivalent fractions or equal fractions. So 3/5 or 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 2 is 10. 6/10 is equal to 3/5. So those are exactly the same fractions. All of these are equivalent fractions to the one next to it. I want to see if you can go ahead and test yourself here. So this is a great time. Stop the video. See if you can make one equivalent fraction to each of these that I have listed. Go ahead and try that. Okay, now that you have tried it, I'm going to start with 2/7 here at the top. And remember, the equivalent fraction rule says I must multiply or divide the numerator and denominator by the same number to give me an equivalent fraction. So I'm going to multiply. I'm just going to double times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 7 times 2, 14. So 4/14 is equal to 2/7. Those are exactly the same. They're equivalent. I'm going to try 1/9. Let's try that times 3. Why not? To get an equivalent fraction. 1 times 3 is 3. 9 times 3 is 27. Very nice. Looks like you're doing pretty well so far. And you might not have chose 3, but that's okay. You can choose any number to multiply as long as the numerator is multiplied by the same number and the denominator are the same numbers. As long as those are the same, you will get an equivalent fraction. Now I'm going to go down to the last here. Instead of multiplying, I'm actually going to divide, because remember our equivalent fraction rule says that you could multiply or divide by the same number. I know that these can both be divided by 2. You do have to be careful when dividing, because you have to make sure each number can be divided by that same number. If not, you can't use that. So 2 can be divided by 2, gives us 1. 8 divided by 2 gives us 4. So we did this one earlier. 1/4 is equal to 2/8. So again, hopefully you're starting to see how this all works, and that's the basics right there of equivalent fractions. Hopefully you enjoyed, and remember, it's a beautiful day in this neighborhood.